Hello, and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. This podcast is an exploration of life and business from a veteran perspective. I'm your host, Brock Briggs, and each week I bring you a conversation with a service member or a veteran at the top of their craft. Today I'm speaking with Jonathan Gensler. Jonathan spent a career worth of time working in the clean energy sector, and in this conversation you hear about some of the problems facing renewable energy today from someone who grew up in coal country. We also get into an underrated mindset veterans don't take advantage of as often as they should, and that's our unique ability to endure despite failure. Jonathan talks a lot about working in sales and is now currently a writer where he's had to get comfortable with a lot of people saying no. Our time in the military makes us great at pushing through these no's. He also gets into a bit of the victimization of veterans and why it's paramount that we don't re-enter the civilian world with our hands out. You can find this episode as well as all other episodes, video versions on YouTube, transcripts, and written content to keep learning, all at scuttlebuttpodcast.co. Please enjoy this episode with Jonathan Gensler.
I am in the midst of kind of clearing my decks of a dozen or so short stories I've been working on for the last 6 months. Maybe not 6 months, maybe four, since the new year, I think. And I'm getting them polished, revised, and what I hope is publishable so I can get them out on submission to the places I'm trying to sell my work to. And I've got a couple that I finished this week, two more that I have been working on this morning that as soon as we're done here, I've got 20 minutes or so to finalize those documents and get them sent out to potential publishers. And so that is what I've been focused on for the last several weeks professionally, is getting this slate of short stories that I've been working on done so that this summer I can start work on a novel and not have any of these other stories hanging over my head.
Are you able to work on multiple stories simultaneously?
For short stories in the revision process, yes. When I'm doing an early first draft of a story, not usually. I need to only really focus on one story at a time when I'm doing initial draft. And with short stories, they're usually 25, 30 pages long, 3 to 6,000 words. And I've been writing that much in about a week. So I was in a sprint earlier this year with a couple of workshops I was part of. I wrote a dozen new short stories over 12 or 15 weeks. And that's what I'm working on now. Is I let them sit for a while, tend to get away from the story, disassociate myself from it, forget the stories a little bit, forget what my intent was, forget what I was thinking when I was writing them, and then come back to the stories, hopefully with some fresh eyes, send them out to some writing partners that I have to get some of their thoughts and critiques, and then revisit the story and hopefully take that early draft and work it into something that's much, much better. And that I can work on several stories. When I'm in the follow-on mode, I'm usually 2 or 3 stories at a time. I'll work on one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and the goal of getting it to a point where I can't really make it better. And then I get them out, track about 100 different places that are accepting and publishing stories like the ones that I write, and got a priority list of who pays the most and who has the quickest turnarounds and what would be the best for my career. And I just run them down through that list and trying to find a home for the stories.
Of
Yeah.
the ones that you're looking at sending to right now, are there any exciting prospects, or with any degree of certainty, can you say that without them saying, oh, I have a decent chance of getting accepted here based on either past performance or communications with them?
I think that I would be remiss to say that yes. Before any contracts are signed, the likelihood of any given story from any given writer being accepted by any particular market is very low. Even for famous, well-known writers, there is more rejection than there is acceptance in the publishing world. I don't know where my stories are going to land. There's more failure in writing, I have discovered over the last year and a half, than in any of the business ventures I was ever in, and than anything I tried in the Army. I worked in sales for several years for a couple of technology companies. And you think of it, you got to get your sales. You got to have your list of prospects. You have to beat the street because you're going to get told no a lot. And getting to yes is all about continuing to pound the pavement and grow relationships. Writing is so much more no
In technology
than
sales.
even trying to. There is so much more no, and you get this. Sometimes you get great no's back. You'll get a no that this story is great. It just doesn't fit what we're trying to do right now. And the biggest magazines or markets, they'll have like less than a 1% acceptance rate. A couple of that I'm really trying to get into. I've got the top of my target list are like 0.3, 0.25% acceptance rate. So I'll accept 1 out of 400 stories because they get 1,200 stories a month and they've got room for six. And so that's that. And that's what I'm pushing myself to get good enough to where I can consistently get more yeses than I am right now. But I know it's always going to be a lot of no's, even with the best stories, because it's a magazine. The editor has to put together something that they think they can sell. If two wonderful stories come in and they're thematically the same, structurally the same, they can only accept one of them. Even if they're perfect otherwise, no one's going to accept two very similar stories when they're trying to have an array, a spectrum in a particular magazine or particular anthology. And that's something that I didn't know coming in, that it was going to be this. I keep my stack of my rejections, and eventually it'll be a foot high. That's okay. It's just a lot of no. So it's great. It's about the
You drew
process of
a
writing.
you drew an interesting correlation there between sales and book writing, and I have a question about that and try and tease that out a little bit further.
Sure.
How do you know when you are the one that is doing something wrong as opposed to it being just a duration game? Sales is like in that same way, it's like sales is like you're positioning something. And if you don't
Hmm.
close the sale, maybe you need to be saying something. You're not talking to the pain point of the customer. You don't have that rapport with them, whatever. Pitching a book, you've got a similar problem. There's another dynamic that's laid on top of that, but is your stuff just not good enough? Or is it, hey, I just got to do this a lot. I got to pick up the phone and call a lot of people. So how do you think about drawing the line in between those so you don't drive yourself crazy and think that you're just terrible? And then also stay encouraged to keep going.
Most of it comes down to building relationships with the people that you're trying to sell something to. Whether that person is, when I worked for Solar City many years ago in New York and was selling to school districts, commercial solar, and you can go in and think you have the best pitch, and they may not be open. You might be doing just prospecting or early project development when they're not looking for anything through a public process. And whether or not they say yes, certainly it can be impacted by the quality of your pitch, but it's just come to realize there's also a lot of timing involved. But with the specific question of, am I doing something wrong, or is it a mismatch of timing, of resources, of contracting? That you can only refine that out if you spend the time to build a relationship with whoever your customer is. And so I did that on the tech side, the multiple companies. You'd spend years nurturing a relationship sometimes before you would finally get a sale. And you keep trying. And I think as long as you're honest with your customer and trying to understand what their needs are, talk to their people. You find time to talk to them outside of the sale, outside of the meeting. So whether that's in conferences and networking and being the places where they are and joining the organizations that they join, so that you can really understand who they are and what they need, what the organizations need. That's how you can figure out what it is that you can offer. And that is true whether it's short stories for a horror anthology, or it's rooftop solar, or and I sold dimmer systems for a company called Lutron to hotels. I built a company here in Nashville. We did home energy testing, Energy Star certifications with home builders, and home builders were my customer here for 5 years. There's a lot of no's in all of that stuff until the customers really probably start to recognize you especially when you're doing something, when you're doing something small and something new and you don't have a big brand behind you. It doesn't matter if you have the best thing in the world. If they don't know who you are, you're probably not that different from a lot of other people who do something really well and are all trying to get there. And I've usually only found success after I've spent time trying to build a relationship with the person on the other end of the phone or the other side of the desk. And after you build that relationship, it can be, you can learn a lot about what you do right, what you do wrong, what they need, what you can't provide, and can hone in on what it is that you can do. With writing, we call it your voice, how you tell a story, the personality you bring into a story, and that can become a recognizable brand. With in business, it's the array of products that you can provide, what may differentiate you from your customers. Just one of the things I found out with home builders is, as a subcontractor, just showing up on time every time and not getting in the way of other subcontractors, that was the only difference. That was why my customers liked me, because we always showed up when we said we were going to show up. We do what we said we were going to do, and we knew how to deliver bad news to them in a way that was helpful, because we were testing homes for energy performance and they didn't always pass. Probably about half the time we had bad news to tell to give to the home builders to say, we got some work to do and we're going to need to come back. And hopefully your closings aren't delayed too much by this, but sometimes they were. But sales are sales. And really, it all comes down to that relationship with the person on the other side, recognizing they're a human, exposing your humanity to them. And that is, I think that's just, that's the core of how I like to enter any interaction with other people, is kind of starting at our mutual shared humanity, whether it's business or friendship or professional, personal, private, anybody. Try to
Think
start
it
there.
emphasizes a long-term focus. You're able to put some trust in people and know that they're going to be around for the next round and the next round. Takes a little bit of the stress off, and that the intent is good, at least just better than the guy that's trying to make a buck and then walk out.
Sure. Which there are a lot of people out there who that's what they wake up and that's their goal for the day. I'm not judging that. It's just not, that's never been successful for me.
I'd love if you would take 2 to 3 minutes and give me a concise as possible background of what lands you where you are today, writing horror short stories.
I grew up in West Virginia in a haunted house, which isn't important until it is important at the end. I went to West Point, graduated in 2000 and joined the Army, served in the Army for 5 years, a couple of deployments after 9/11. After I got out of the Army in 2005, I went and lived in New Zealand for a year, about half of that time just out in the wilderness, kind of reconnecting with myself and with the world and decompressing from combat and the training cycle that 5 years in the Army gave to me. That was when I really focused in on doing something with regards to sustainability and the environment. I knew also that I wanted to work in the private sector at the time and not go into the government or in the nonprofit sector. So I came back from New Zealand and spent several years working for various companies. I went and got 2 master's degrees. I went to MIT and got an MBA, and I went to Harvard and got a master's of public administration, all focused on energy, environment, entrepreneurship, and policy, largely because the energy challenges that face us are what are driving our environmental challenges. And the energy business is heavily tied to public policy. It's kind of why I chose those 2 degrees and it intertwined them. They're so entangled that not understanding one or the other leads to a lot of bad decisions, both policy wise and business wise, I think. So I worked in that space for almost formally from when I graduated in 2010 until when did I close my business? 2022. I closed Revive Energy down. I worked in New York City for a couple of solar companies. We moved to Nashville and I started my own company here, working with home builders, largely just identifying the market. What can I use my expertise in? What's going on here? Massive home building, massive growth, big problem with poor and low quality homes. New energy codes had just been implemented. They're going to need to be tested to meet code. And I started a business to help meet that demand. It's good market, hard market, good market opportunity, hard customers to get to trust you, home builders in Nashville. After a few years, we had a good stable of customers. I was growing slowly, trying to balance my life, three small kids. And then my dad got sick, passed away in 2019. COVID hit, we had our third kid. And in my processing of my grief from my father's death, I started writing a lot. Now, I'd written a lot earlier, college. I have stacks of my journals from college and the Army that I still have. But I'd largely stopped kind of writing for pleasure. And processing my dad's death, I started writing more, and very quickly the self-introspective journaling turned into stories. And I just started seeing stories everywhere that I was and started writing them down. Shared a couple with some friends who said, "This is pretty good. You should consider trying to get these published." That's what I started to try to do. I spent 6 months writing and working and realized I didn't need to continue working because my wife and I have been successful enough that I could take some time off from having to get a real paycheck, and I could focus all my effort on writing. So after 6 months of realizing I don't have time to do either of these, I closed my business down, sold off some of the pieces to care of my employees, and then have been focused on only writing for the last 15 months. And in that time, I've had 3 published stories, 2 of them at what we call professional rates, which I've been told is very good for your first year as a professional full-time writer. I jumped in full-time and trying to make it happen. Now all I do is write and read and revise and spend time with my family. My wife and 3 kids are very important.
Sounds like a pretty good life to me.
It is. That was probably a little longer than 2 or 3 minutes, but it's been a windy road for the last 23 years since I graduated West Point.
So you started your degree off, part of your undergrad at West Point was in nuclear energy.
Yeah, it was
Why the
my minor.
Okay. So why the early interest in that? And I'm guessing that in combination with maybe your time in New Zealand kind of renews and gives you this driving focus towards that. Why? And then I'd love to get your take on what the state of the energy environmental crisis is in your eyes.
The reason I've been drawn and worked in energy for the better part of my professional career, I think is rooted in the fact that I grew up in West Virginia. I grew up in coal country. My dad was an electrician, but in large part like an industrial electrician. He was like a union master electrician who spent most of his career working at a refinery and or power plants doing big maintenance shutdowns at coal plants, gas plants, nuclear plants. Like he'd travel around, but a lot of it was at the Marathon refinery in Ashland, Kentucky. And so growing up in that environment, I just took for granted this infrastructure that we had around us. You grow up in coal country and you are presented with a very limited worldview on coal's place in our economy. Grow up, my livelihood as a child was provided by the oil industry because that's what ultimately paid my dad and allowed us to have everything that we had in our. My mom was a school teacher, but we had a nice middle class lifestyle in Southern West Virginia. Not a lot of trauma. I had 4 sisters I'm still very close with. I'm still close with my mom. We had a nice family. Huntington, West Virginia was a lovely place to grow up. But when I went into the Army and began to experience firsthand our reliance on fossil fuels, in particular on the battlefield, and went and fought a war, which I'm going to say it was over oil, but we were, in my processing my time in combat, like when I went to New Zealand and I spent time in the wilderness, I was more like I had an expansion of my worldview that I was putting all these pieces together. And at the time, I've reread my journals. I came back from New Zealand with the one goal being, I don't want my kids to have to go fight in the same wars that I fought in. Whether or not they're over these resources, they are over these. People fight wars over resources. It's pretty much the only reason we fight wars. Access to resources, whether they're trade contracts or access to oil in the ground, it's driven a lot of conflict. And I wanted to help us push our economy so it'd be less dependent on fossil fuel resources. At the time, it didn't have anything to do with climate change in 0506. That was not on my radar. It was more about the resources and wanting to preserve the natural world. When I got into the private sector and I worked for Lutron, again, I dove headfirst in. I became it's called a lead accredited professional leadership in energy and environmental design. Got very involved with the U.S. Green Building Council, learned about sustainable design, and worked my way. I became the lead liaison for the company with our local chapter. And that experience, more than the business experience, and it's seen this intersection of policy being largely at loggerheads with the business community, is why I decided to go to grad school. I didn't have the experience or the knowledge to be effective at what I wanted to do. And that was the driving reason behind going to MIT and Harvard. And I think I was right, learned quite a bit, got some really great exposure. At the federal level, I worked for an organization called ARPA-E for one of the summers. It's like an advanced research project agency for energy, very advanced technological development. And found some great opportunities coming out of those two schools to work in the field, doing some tech development. I worked with a few startups while I was in grad school, and then largely a couple of different solar companies out of grad school doing project development. I felt pretty good about that work. I worked with the Department of Defense, and then I worked with the New York State public sector. But I think it's really rooted in me thinking about where I come from. I come from the coal fields of Southern West Virginia. My family is still there, and it is a region of our country which continues to be left behind economically, environmentally. These are people that I love. This is a culture that I love, I identify with. They're good people who want to be good people, and yet this identity with coal as being of utmost importance and fundamental to who Southern West Virginians are is at odds with just the knowledge I have that it's killing the people there actively with mining disasters and poor, but passively and compulsively with coal's impact on our climate. And we see that in the increased floods that we have in eastern Kentucky and in West Virginia, driven by climate change, driven by the denuding of mountains for strip mining. It's not a good thing. And I don't think badly about the people who live there, who that's part of their identity. And so a large part of my career has been trying to grow businesses, grow technologies that can release the hold that fossil fuels have on the parts of the country that I really care about and give different opportunities for them.
You were mentioning some of the really harmful effects that coal and oil have had not only on the environment, but just a lot of the places that we love, the natural world, as you called it, and the fighting over those resources, certainly as well. All of those are very well documented and have been, in my opinion, for some time. You
Sure.
set out to tackle this 20 something years ago, and maybe it's more in the microscope now than it was back then, but still very aware of that. In your opinion, what is making us move so slow in the change?
Very large amounts of invested capital. It is very hard to shift the status quo from anything. It's very hard to move billions of dollars that have been invested in technologies that underpin the economy. Even when investors have the desire to shift and change, there are large swaths of time where things are going to be uncertain. And shifting kind of the backbone of the largest economy in the world, it obviously takes longer than anyone wants. I largely think it's that. I think it's that. I think it's this, there's this such a mass of capital, time, and identity invested in oil and in coal. And I think rightfully was discovered in Pennsylvania in what, 1860 something, I think. And then it was discovered in Texas, and then like fueled the American growth. Those discoveries underpinned so much of what it is that we think it means to be an American. That unrestrained, unfettered access, that it was the key to our victories in World War II, our own access to oil and fuel. These things have been really good for us as a culture writ large. Very bad for people who live in those places. Coal was never good to West Virginians. It was good to owners of West Virginia coal mines. You tell these stories like it powered the nation. Of course it did. Yeah, absolutely. Appalachian coal powered the nation through 2 world wars. How do you come and tell the people whose grandparents did that, whose families have lived and died in those mountains, that man, it's really bad. It's killing the planet now, and we've got to stop. That's hurtful. It doesn't. A lot of times, the people who have tried to enact these changes don't recognize that. They don't want to identify with these people, with the cultures, and so you've got people attacking them who they see as different, who are different from the ones who've owned them and who've owned them for the last 150 years. Or there another group of wealthy billionaires who want to come and own them now? And so there's the lack of trust in the communities with, I think, authority in general, and the trend layer that on top of the systemic transition. It's very challenging, and I actually believe we are making progress. I think we're making significant progress in reducing the amount of coal that we use, that we need for power. The growth in renewables has been slower than what is probably necessary, but better than a lot of people thought could even be possible 20 years ago. And again, energy systems, like the electricity system in the US, is so risk averse because we are so dependent upon it. You gotta have 99 and 99% uptime, like in some places by law. And trying to bring in a new technology and say it's going to work, regulators, we need to see that it's going to work before we're going to transition everything, because the economy is dependent upon that amount of uptime. And so we're going to need to see at least 5 years of performance data. Well, how do you get 5 years of performance data if no one lets you build something large and test it and run it for 5 years? So there's a lot of roadblocks in shifting the foundation of a global economy. What's happening is you get places that can run pilots for those 5 years, and then after those 5 year things, more larger chunks of the system switching over. And I think we're in the midst of that now. The microgrids, being able to do smaller scale things with the growth of large scale renewables being integrated to the grid, with the proven performance of kind of macro battery systems acting as kind of virtual power plants. The testing and the analysis and the validation that these things aren't as risky, that takes years and trillions of dollars of investment, which don't return. It's not, these aren't like tech IPOs. They're not gonna turn 1,000%, even the best case, in a 5 year horizon. These are 10, 20 year horizon investments. And so they're not sexy, they're not fast, they're not quick. We've got political divides over different parts of the country that make a public policy that could enable this hard, make it tricky. But I think we're doing all right, honestly. I have more hope now than I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Hearing how my friends and family in West Virginia talk about these things now is heartening to me. Even places deep in coal country are much more open to doing things differently than they were a decade ago, and it's great.
I had never really considered that identity piece that you mentioned, but that really resonated with me. A couple weeks back, I attended the Berkshire Hathaway Warren Buffett's annual conference.
I read your posts on that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. This will you'll I It's about something that I wrote in there. One of the people had asked him why the move to renewables has been so slow. Berkshire Hathaway has a large renewable energy
Hmm.
project, Berkshire Hathaway Energy, in their portfolio of businesses. And one of the things that he talked about was, he references World War II a lot when he talks, but he said back in World War II, we had this unity of purpose where we were all united under one cause. We were all looking to accomplish the same thing. And he really hammered home the fact that our country is not united about getting onto renewable energy. And he said there's companies lined up out the door to make the investments, but we're all rowing in different directions when it comes to that. And it made me think of, I thought of that when you mentioned generations of families that are basically around today because of a certain industry. I could see why that would be a difficult conversation to be having. Not just,
Yeah,
and that's one group of people too.
it's one
That's not
group of
even
people.
counting everybody else, but there are a lot of people who are around because of that. So
Yeah, a lot of people made their fortunes because of it.
it's
So,
exciting and interesting to me that you're optimistic. I feel like of the large proponents of renewables that I talk to, they seem very downbeat. And maybe it's just a general upsettedness about where the state is, and maybe it's not moving fast enough. But I think you outlined a really couple of good examples as to why things move slow. Change takes a long time when there's all of this money and things that are not quick to show a return on.
yeah, I'm hopeful. I don't work in it professionally anymore. I certainly continue to pay attention, and I certainly continue to invest in companies like Evo and Jeremy's and other folks who are actively growing businesses in the space and proving business models and proving technology that is that that are going to be the key to finding and mapping and the path forward. Yeah, I remain pretty hopeful that we're gonna get where we need to go. I recognize that we are not where we need to be right now, and I do believe that we will have to deal with some pretty negative consequences from climate change. But I can accept that. We've chosen that as a culture, and some people are going to suffer because of it, and I wish that wasn't the case, but I ultimately believe we will get where we need to go. And not to downplay the people that had to suffer, but it's hard to think of any major social movements or trajectory changes in the history of humanity that weren't weren't kicked into motion by mass human suffering. We don't tend to just make ourselves better because we're doing all right and we want to do a little bit better. It's usually caused by, no, something terrible happened and we really need to change. And then we can discover a way for the future to be better than the terrible thing that you might be going through at the time. That's We don't learn easy, but we do learn.
We're a little bit hard headed, I think, sometimes, but I agree
We are.
generally.
I am personally hard headed. My kids are hard headed. As a country, we are bullheaded, but we have the ability to learn when things get bad enough. And I mourn those who have to suffer and won't make the journey through to the other side because those people exist. And I think part of being human, and this connects to what I was saying at the beginning, I think people across on either side of this, you have to recognize the humanity of what each side is losing and the pain that they may have to go through in order to cross this chasm that we're like, and it is a chasm. Even the people you disagree with the most, I think you have to start with recognizing that they're not inhuman animals. They have wants and needs and desires and loves and families. And a part of what all of us are going to have to do is give up some of what makes us in order to get to someplace better. And we got to give up some things that might be doing us harm, but feel good. And that's the way it always is. To get better, you have to recognize what's not working for you. And even if it worked for you in the past, growth is personal growth, social growth, or there's prices must be paid. And I read this, our suffering defines our successes. I read that recently. If I don't, I You can look it up. I'm probably misquoting it, but it's stuck in my head. It's like the old quote that the obstacle becomes the way. Where you put your work and what you're willing to suffer through growth and pain, that becomes where you will succeed. And it's not the easy stuff. We don't grow into the easy stuff and have a better future. So
I like that little drop of stoicism in there. That's good stuff. There is some interesting charts that have occasionally make the rounds online of interesting businesses and technologies and business models that are created in trough times, recessions, and slow economic growth times. I'm always really inspired to look at those. You had mentioned that you are actively looking and investing in companies that you think are leading the charge on this. I
Yeah.
would love to hear from your perspective what companies and or technologies you find the most interesting and think are going to be the key to bringing that future a little bit closer.
Probably the technologies that I mentioned. I think that there is going to be a huge opportunity in real virtual power plants, as in large clusters of batteries that can store mistimed renewable energy production and deploy it when necessary. And I started in batteries at the Department of Energy when I worked there 14 years ago. I got my I didn't know anything about batteries until then. And I did this real deep dive on battery technology. And I became enamored of it 14 years ago, way ahead of when it was really ready. And it rammed my head and got some bruises trying to develop battery backed up solar powered microgrids before the technology was quite there. But it's there now. Microgrid technology, which includes electric vehicle to grid stuff, like what Jeremy's going to be enabling with TIVA, but that other folks in that space. So that space, vehicle to grid and microgrid technology and battery technology are the things that excite me the most because they are the things that enable small communities to be resilient and make them more survivable. We're not going to stop the floods and the extreme weather events. What we can do is help communities, human communities, survive them and be resilient in the face of them. That stuff is going to get worse, but we now have the technology to give communities hope in the face of that so that we don't have New Orleans after Katrina, where there's no power for weeks, months, and people are hopeless. I think that these are things that can have they're smaller scale. They don't require massive amounts of investment. Equipping a hospital campus or school campuses with their own microgrid can create those places can become a safe haven in the times of tragedy and extreme weather. And I hope that we continue to see the growth of that model and see it adopted widely because I think it's going to be necessary. And I also think there's a pretty good economic case to be made, especially in the public sector, to have those, to build them, to act as buffers against wildly swinging electricity prices. You can create a buffer for that and create more stability in your costs for longstanding public institutions, especially. But that's the market where I'm most excited. There are a lot of companies. I don't want to pick any company. There are a lot of companies that hopefully will surprise us. But when I look for opportunities to invest, those are the markets that I look for. And then it comes down to the people involved. And
What was your major takeaway from building a company in this space? Maybe it's about entrepreneurship as a whole. Maybe it's an insight into this particular industry. What did you walk away from that experience knowing that we could learn and take away?
my company, Revive Energy, like I said, we worked with home builders here in Middle Tennessee. The biggest things I learned, and I learned almost all of this, wasn't the first time I learned the lessons. You have to have patience and humility. Even if you have the best solution and you know it's the right thing and you know you can be better than someone else, which I had great confidence in the team that I had built and our capabilities and what we could do. Going in and just trying to sell that doesn't work. It takes more than technology. It takes more than even being able to execute. For us, working with home builders in Middle Tennessee, which I think is emblematic of any area of at least the US, again, it comes down to relationships. And you can be the best at what you do and hire the best people to do it with you and for you. But if you're not focused on the people outside of that you're interfacing with and trying to understand them, I think you're most likely going to fail. And we failed took us a couple years before I bang in my head like, why aren't they calling us back? Why are they going with those other guys? When I listen to them and I know what the other guys are showing up late or blowing things off or making mistakes. And with some of them, I could still only get maybe a small amount of business, but I wasn't able to break a relationship they had that was long-standing, just generational relationships in some cases here. And it wasn't until I really understood that, like, the business is never just business, especially outside of really big companies. When you're dealing with small business and business to business relationships, it's never just business. There's always a relationship that if you don't have, someone will trump you. If someone can come in and if they know somebody, they can be worse at the job than you and charge more and show up late. And it's a coin toss. This is my experience here. It could be a coin toss whether or not you could get the business. If they knew someone and could trust them, even if they weren't that good, you have to focus on building a relationship, integrating yourself, getting to know them, sharing your humanity with them, making it more than about the business at hand, but about lives and friendship and a relationship beyond showing up at a job site and sending an invoice. And when you can get beyond that, you're more likely to find success and find a more forgiving environment where you can make mistakes and grow yourself. So no, they don't teach you that in business school. But
All you got to do is throw the numbers up in a cash flow model and just drive 20% year on year sales, and bing, you got a business, John. It
there you
just,
go. No, you're
it's
done.
numbers. That's all.
Well,
You're,
yeah,
oh man. That resonates in a big way. And I think that there is a big lesson there. It's relationships with people, your reputation over time, and how much that means whether your business ends up being a success or not. There's a lot of conversations of like in the tech industry of people funding each other's companies based solely on just knowing the person. They know that they're of high integrity.
sure.
And I think that what you're saying echoing that, it echoes that. I want to talk about two of the things that you sent over to me about your views and what you think that you have to offer the veteran community. You
Mhm.
good to dive into these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you mind if I read them?
Go ahead. You
Cool.
read. No, feel free.
This first one, you said our experience make us more valuable than most veterans realize. And the question that I posed to you was, what is it that the veteran community can learn from uniquely you? So that and the ability to show up, endure, and act is a growing rarity, one that can be translated to nearly every and any endeavor. Capacity to make decisions, take action in face of uncertainty. Do you want to unpack what that means and like how that has manifested itself in your life as you have long since exited the military and how
Hmm.
that's showed up in your own life?
I think I'll focus first on the notion of uncertainty. I learned very early at both West Point and in the active army that there is very little that you can control. You can control what's in front of you when it's in front of you, and whether it's soldiers or equipment or an enemy on the battlefield, you can only hope to control things when they're in front of you and when you have the tools that you're equipped that you need in order to effect control, which most of the time, everything that's impacting you is well outside of your scope. And that creates uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen at any given time, how other people are going to think, what kind of mood people are going to be in. You can't control what their family life is like, how whether their spouse and then got into an argument the night before. You can't control the weather. And over my 9 years in the military, I am very comfortable with this. Okay, I can't think about, I need to be prepared for a wide array of things. I'm never going to be prepared for everything that can happen, but I can be prepared for anything so that regardless of what happens, I won't let it knock me off my feet too much. I can recover quickly because you have to, because in combat, which is what it really comes down to, you have to be able to get back up off your feet quickly because nothing's ever going to go right. and your best hope is to be the one standing after you've made a whole bunch of very quick decisions, and you hope that you've prepared your soldiers well enough to do the same so that they can operate as a team and figure out what the mission needs to be at any given time and work to that end, knowing that everything around them is outside of their control. The unit on your right or your left, what they may be doing, what's going to happen with the weather. And so if you went through and had an experience that was at all similar to mine, you grow very comfortable with accepting uncertainty and chaos. And that's just the state of the world outside of very small purview. And that's freeing because you can then assess what you do know to be true, assess kind of how well do I believe that is true, is high or a low degree of certainty with what you think anyway, and then make a decision and act on that decision and not let all these other worries blow you off course or stop you cold and make you anxious and nervous, too scared to take an action. When I got out of the Army, I noticed that I really am different, kind of my peers that may have gone to very good schools and have worked in the private sector the last 5 years. Like I'm more willing to take risk, measured risk. I try to understand the risk, but willing to take risks in almost any facet of my life and then work against it. And I think that is a skill that is useful in everything. That's in publishing now, like I was saying earlier. I can't control anything about what an editor is going through or thinking or feeling. I can't control the 1,000 other stories that are being submitted against mine. All I can do is put in the effort that is the best that I can do. And then when I inevitably get rejected, I don't let it knock me down. It's okay. What's the next one? Okay, I've got a system that I'm fighting against the chaos in. This is the chaos I'm trying to get published in. I organize what I can, what I do know, and then I created a fairly flexible system to slot my work into and try to find success. I control what I can control, and I really don't worry about the things that I can't. I don't think that they're unimportant. I try to understand what I can, but it's so much is out of it. It's just chaos. It's all chaos out there. All the other people with their humanity and their relationships and their decisions, none of it's predictable. And I think veterans are more comfortable with that than the a lot of the civilian population. It's not unique to veterans. I don't want to say that only us, no one else can do this. There are people who grow up in rough neighborhoods and with rough family lives or do hard jobs, and they can get this. So it's not unique to the veteran community, but within the veteran community, I think it is very prevalent. And I don't think that it's always recognized by the veteran that they have this. Those aren't the skills that they're trying to sell when they're trying to position themselves for a job or a role. They don't lead with that. And I think that's the mistake, which was my point in the first little note I sent you is I think that is a number one top selling point and selling proposition for anyone going into any role. Look, you can throw whatever you want at me and I'm not going to get flustered. I'll figure out a path forward. Whether I can do it myself or find the resources that I need to make it happen, it doesn't matter. Like, we figure it out and I'm not going to get flustered. And I expect everything to go to shit. And when it does, we'll reassess and keep moving forward. I think it's very valuable.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here, so
Sure.
bear with me. Do you think that there are veterans that take this idea with a glass half empty sort of perspective and weaponize it to not make decisions, saying that everything is beyond their control, a sort of
Sure.
external locus of control
Mhm.
idea? And there is all of this chaos, and nothing I do matters. Therefore, I do nothing.
Yes. I think that is the opposite end of the spectrum of thinking, no, I can control everything and everything's going to be fine, which I see a lot and have seen a lot, especially in the tech world, where people believe that they can control for everything and then don't do adequate planning. I certainly believe the opposite is true, especially I've experienced it. whether it's in the veteran community or disgruntled. I've seen some cops I know that have retired and had some pretty harrowing experiences as police officers. Or again, I grew up with some pretty underprivileged people in Southern West Virginia who that was their life view from their childhood was doesn't matter what I do, I'm never going to have any effect. So why even try? I think both of those are obviously dangerous. One, I think the latter is, I think, is sad. And because you can always control yourself, you can always control your own thoughts, and you can always control your own response to situations. And really, that's the only control that you have. And so when you give up that, that saddens me that they're losing some notion of their humanity in that. And more than anything, that makes me sad. And I wish for those people to be also to be able to take a step back and think, is that really true? Is that the story you're telling yourself because you don't want to fail? And it's easier to say, I'm never going to win, so I try, than accepting failure as a part of the work. In many cases, it is the work is failing, and the successes come few and far between. They only come because of the failures. They define the success. So I think every individual probably if that is how they believe. And yes, there are certainly I've encountered military vets who are that, embody that. And mostly it saddens me that that is where they are. And I'd like to talk to them to get to the point, to get to the root of why they feel that way. Because I don't think there's not a one size fits all answer to that, but I think there is an answer to it for any individual because everyone has some will to power in their life, even if you feel like it's been beaten out of you.
The second point that you wrote me, you said there's a strong societal pressure to accept some level of victimhood or victimization as a veteran, that you should
Mm.
get yours because you've earned it or deserve it. That nothing could be further from the truth. Everything about public service is valuable and translates into something that can be harnessed for your future. There's nothing about completing a contract with the military that means you are owed anything in the future. When you sent that over, I was just took a moment and said, thank you for saying that. Why is it that people feel entitled after completing something that they signed up for?
This is something that I don't actually feel is starts off as an internal thing. I think we have externalized as a society. Thank you. The notion. Thank you for your service. It's just it's hard to even say those words without it being trite and utterly meaningless. But can't go to a professional sports event without there being at least, I have not been to one. I've not been to a professional sports event where they have not taken 5 or 10 minutes to honor the veterans and to bring some vets out in front of everyone and everyone stands up and cheers for them. And not that is wrong, but it has become a default that if there's some event where it's not done, people, why didn't they do that? Don't our vets deserve it? It's like this undercurrent in our society where you have to at least give the impression of no, we got to stand up or cheer for them. They sacrificed so much. They wrote a blank check for the country. They didn't write a blank check. They got paid better than their peers in most cases to do a job that yes was dangerous, but is also very fulfilling in most cases. And then society treats all of us as if we're something special and that we don't have to continue to earn that specialness. I find it very odd how we treat and honor military veterans as one. It's always felt a bit disingenuous to me. And then we have an array of organizations that pop up that exist only to help veterans maximize whatever their benefits. Again, telling them, acting as if these are things that they've earned, and maybe they have, but there's so much more that we have to continue to do in life that it's a bit of a case of kind of resting on your laurels and resting on past accomplishments and past deeds. When in many cases it was a 2-year enlistment or a 4-year enlistment. I didn't serve 20 years in the Army. I served for 5. I have friends who are still in the Army at 23 years doing great things, really great things. I've never tried to rest on me being a vet to get any special treatment. And there was never that I did it. It's a West Point. Great. It's opened doors for me. My service certainly has probably opened doors for me, but they were doors. It wasn't like they'd buy me a car. It was like a doorway to go do something else, to take what I've learned and harness it and use it for something else in the service of something else and not just my own self-aggrandizement. And I think there's a lot of socialization in our country, especially after 9/11, 9/11, to put people up on pedestals because it's easier than signing up yourself. It's easier than holding your government account for how they're actually executing the wars that we're sending people to. It's easier to take 5 minutes out of an NFL football game and make everyone stand and cheer for a handful of guys than it is to actually think about why we're sending people to war and why it took 22 years to get rid of an authorization for war after 9/11. We don't ask ourselves these hard questions as a society. We just think it's a thank you for your service. No, it's one free beer at Applebee's. Yeah, sure, I'll take the free beer at Applebee's. But I hope that's not all, that you think that you've wiped your hands clean of our nation's decision to create veterans in the first place. The fact that we have veterans, it's not always something to be, it means we failed. Like the fact that we've had to go to war and chosen to go to war, that means we as a society have failed in a lot of ways at accomplishing our goals without killing other people and destroying things, because that's what war is. All the other things that we could have done to get to the point didn't work. Sometimes it doesn't, but it still is a failure, and we should try to get better as opposed to passively celebrating this kind of caste of citizens, which some people will continue to feel bad for and act like they're victims. Oh, you poor vets. Yeah, come have a free beer at Applebee's. You probably don't have a job. Are you homeless? We'll give you both sides. It really rubs me the wrong way. Again, because I see the act of service as being really useful. Like the veterans organizations that I really like the Mission Continues, that put vets to work in their communities, not as a, hey, give me free stuff because I'm a vet. It's no, I'm here and we're here to serve. We're here to help you because we know how to organize and we know how to work together and make things happen in communities where they need to happen. And that is the model that I think is most useful for veteranship. It's not a what can you give me model. It's what can I continue to do? How can I help? There's a reason for me to help. I feel connected and tied to the community and I want to help. I know that I can, so I should.
I respect and appreciate your bipartisan distaste for both sides of the aisle there, because I think that you hit the nail on the head. There are problems with people exiting service with their hand out and saying, I did this, you owe me. And there is a lot of organizations and just a general feeling from the rest of the non-veteran population of, as you say, it's like a custom. It's like saying please or thank you. It's thank you for
Hmm.
your service. And as you said, obviously veterans joke about that statement to one another, which just cracks me up to no end. But somebody was talking to me the other day about what I have learned from the podcast. And man, my feelings about the role of the veteran re-entering society continues to change, and I am feel no closer to understanding it than before I even joined, because
Sure.
keep seeing different sides of what people do and how they act in and out of service, and I feel like I'm continuously wrestling with it. I wrote a piece a couple months back. I am in grad school currently and wrote a research piece on VA healthcare. And one of
Hmm.
the pieces that I found in the archive of veteran data out there, the priority group 1 VA healthcare rating, which is 50% disabled or above, has
Hmm.
grown by 390% from 2001 to 2018. So, for context, though, and that number doesn't mean a lot, it will mean a lot in comparison to the fact that the total number of veterans in VA healthcare during that same period of time in the whole healthcare system only rose by 80%.
Wow.
And I still wrestle with that, and I've posed so many I get a lot of flack on Twitter. I keep stirring the pot on trying to find a good answer for why that might be, I certainly wouldn't say all of it is people coming with their hand out. I think that there's a general acceptance of being able to seek mental health that was not there pre
Sure.
global war on terror and a lot of other kind of tailwinds to that. But I am very leery of some of the organizations that you mentioned. And that in my piece I wrote up, I screenshotted a Facebook group where you can pay $99 to be coached on how to get 100% disability
Yes.
from things like that are extremely repulsive, but also highlights the fact that there are people who legitimately do need help, and it just everything continues to get more gray as I spend more time in this space.
No.
I
Fascinating
was hoping you
topics.
had all the answers, John. That's why I asked you on here. I need you to lay it out.
I just recognize that as it's a problem. It's a challenge. Because certainly there is a growing acceptance to seek out treatment for non-physical trauma, and there is a growing awareness of how to treat those things. But is that, yeah, like you said, is that enough to make up for the gap?
It's a pretty big gap.
That's a really, that's a really big gap. And how does it compare to how would it compare post Vietnam? A lot of people didn't even want to. They would come back and not even want to be anything to do with the after Vietnam. But I'm wondering if, yeah, just how does it compare? Maybe it's completely uncomparable data set because the population is so different and the treatments that are accepted as valid and the conditions that are accepted as valid after combat are so different now than they were in any other era. But regardless, it's like there's got to be an explanation. And some of the explanation is no, we will coach you on how to get to 100%. Now, whether or not that person are they lying to get to 100%? Are they being coached on how to talk about what's actually happening? I don't know. I've not experienced, I don't have any personal experience with that. I'm partially disabled. I got out in 2005. I just went in before I left Fort Carson. They were like, you're out processing, go and you should go get a VA physical exam. So I did. Every 5 years I've had to go in, and my rating has bounced between 10 and 60%. I've never done anything different in any of my things. My knees are screwed up, my shoulders kind of screwed up. I go in, they do their little tests, and one doctor examines me and he bumped me up to 60%. And I was like, I got the thing back. And I'm like, okay. These couple years later, I didn't, I went in, I didn't even go in. Someone else, I don't know. It got put down to 20. But anyways, it gets all over the place. Every 5 years it changes. And it's completely inexplicable to me how and why that changes. But I'm, like you said, this isn't the first time I've heard that there are organizations out there that will coach vets on what and how to say things so that they can get a higher rating. And if they're not being honest, it is a dishonorable and shameful. And I hope they think twice about their decisions in the future when they have to go back and invariably get reassessed. Because that
I
doesn't
think it
get, that's
goes
a bad, yeah.
I think it harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, that locus of control thing.
Mm.
When it's other people's problem, I think that when you believe that everything is driven by things that happen outside of you, I could see why you would think that you would come more so with your hand out.
It's an understandable response. Yeah,
Yeah. We've completely sidetracked from where I thought we were going to end up here, but this has been an interesting conversation, and I think your insights into a strength and a particular problem that the veteran community is facing is very spot on. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts
of
with
course.
me and everybody listening. What is it that myself and the listeners can walk away with from this conversation from you that we could go and implement and be better in our lives today for?
I read that you were going to ask me this, and I have been thinking about it. And it's the advice that I continue to give myself, and it is just do the work. Sometimes the work that you want to do will pay you, and sometimes the work that you want to do won't pay you, in which case you'll need to find some other way to supplement, but make space in your life to do the work that you want to do. And I have a lot, and I'll put it in the context of writing, what I'm doing now. A lot of my writer friends have another job because writing does not pay the bills. Unless you're in the top 1% of writers, writing is not covering your expenses. It does not pay a living wage to write and sell stories in America today. And yet these people, wonderful people, these amazing storytellers put in the effort to write. And writing is not easy. It's not just like writing something and it's done. It's soul searching, gut wrenching, hard work, examining your faults and failures, examining in minutia what you do that is wrong and trying to make it better. And again, it doesn't pay very well. And yet it's now probably, I was thinking about this. I think it's the hardest work I've ever done for the least amount of pay. And yet I find it to be almost the most satisfying. Minus, there was about 6 months when I lived in New Zealand when I was working outside as a landscaping laborer, like working for a landscaping company. And that was a very satisfying work. And the pay was all right. But it was like intense physical labor outside in New Zealand and the most beautiful country in the world. That's a unique experience. But just the act, I love writing. I love telling stories. I love putting down things in my head and trying to figure out a way. What about the story is important for a reader to know? What about it should I just keep in my head and not write and allow the reader to do some of the work of storytelling with me? And that process for me is very satisfying to get something done and to get it sent off and to have someone who publishes stories professionally decide that the story was good enough they want to put it in a magazine. The first couple of times that happened was one of the best feelings I've ever had. But again, pay was the lowest I've ever been paid in 25 years for that amount of effort. And it doesn't matter. I'm going to continue to do it. I'm going to do it more, and hopefully the pay will get better. But like all of these writers I know, they have second jobs. They're teachers. Some like work for insurance companies. They're librarians. They run small businesses. And yet, when I meet them, they are writers. The other things that pay the bills, they do that because they have to, because you have to feed yourself and feed your family. They don't introduce themselves as that thing. They introduce themselves as writers, and they're writing and struggling to tell stories that other people want to read. And so my advice is find that thing which you want to do, which is going to push you and maybe not make financial sense, but that is going to help you be the best version of yourself, and do it. Just do it. Make the time. You don't find the time. You're not going to find the time here. You're not going to wait for someone to carve time out for you. Make a choice, carve the time yourself, make it a priority, and do it. And I think you'll be happier. I'm happier now that I'm writing than I've been in a long time. Just processing all these things that have happened to me and finding ways to talk about them and think through them and the lenses of characters that I create. It's great for me. But I think everyone has something like that. And the lucky people, they get to do that and it pays them very well. And I know people like that, but it doesn't always, but you still need that in your life. And I think everyone needs that in their life. And again, it has to be a choice that you make, that I think you need to connect with the humanity of others. This is an act of connecting with the humanity in yourself. And it's really good for you when you can find that thing and make the time to do it. So do the work.
That making the time is so important because there's excuses up and down the wall as to why we can't do something, but you've got time and the money for what's important to you at the end of the
Mhm.
day. So, one last question. What can we do to be useful to you?
You can
Now's
follow me.
if you need me to give you some ideas, I can. You're a great writer. I've read a handful of your work. If you want to plug your website where maybe people can go and read some of that work.
Yes,
Uh,
that's what I was going to do.
okay,
I
good.
was going to say, right now, my website is a work in progress, but everything I do writing related, I put out on social media. Right now, it's on Twitter, the dumpster fire that Twitter is. I'm at J Gensler. I try not to post anything that's related at all to politics unless something really. I've been posting stuff about the war in Ukraine because I have friends in Ukraine, and I was a Russian major in undergrad, and I have a lot of deep history with the region. But mostly I post about writing. I share other people's writing and I share my own when I have things to share. My website is jonathangensler.com. It is, again, there's nothing there right now. A priority for me to have by the end of the summer up and running. And I wish I had more. What you can do for me is go read. You don't even have to read me. Read more stories, read books, read short stories in magazines, go to your local independent bookstore and ask the person there if they can recommend a book for you. And they'll ask you what kind of things you like. So go and support your independent bookstore in your town. And if you don't have an independent bookstore, hell, go to Barnes and Noble. They're more independent than the big Zon. Support physical bookstores. Buy books there for yourself, for your friends and family, so that those bookstores are there when I have novels to put in them.
I love it. Jonathan, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was great. Thank you as well.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.